Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Nick Penston. I'm here with my colleague Jimmy McNamara. We're here to bring you on a journey on how to enable DevOps mindset at scale in your enterprise. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'd love you to go away with learnings across two key areas. The first is when you think of the key pillars to focus on in your organization, what should you be focused on? What type of challenges can you meet? And how can you alleviate those challenges? Then when you think to the implementation in your teams, what are the things you should be laser focused on to guarantee success? All right, let's dive straight in. So first, a quick disclaimer. All right, so before we get into that, I'd like to set some context. It's an organization going through a rapid cloud adoption. Different parts of the organization are going through different parts of that journey. And in this scenario, you'll often have teams that are at one end of the scale, really mature when it comes to automation, when it comes to cloud engineering and agile processes. And then on the other side of that scale, you're going to have teams that are beginning that journey, and then a lot of teams somewhere in the middle who are on that path already. So when you think of DevOps, how do you frame the approach when you think of enabling that mindset? One way to think about it is across three areas, and that's across engineering excellence, operational excellence, and agility excellence. And ultimately, together, they help you drive that delivery excellence, which helps accelerate the velocity of that value to your customers. So when we talk about delivery excellence, it's the pursuit of mastery in the craft of software engineering, being laser focused on developing that capability. The same for operational excellence when you're building those highly resilient and scalable application, really focused on that mastery in that discipline. And underpinning both of those is the pursuit of mastery in agility excellence. And this isn't just around feedback to your customers and the processes and flow of work. It's about the agility of the code itself. If you want to have an agile business, you're going to have agility in the software itself and ultimately the code that runs those applications. So when you think it in this frame of mind, what are the type of areas you should be focused on? I'm going to focus on today on three areas, and by no means a finite list. And I've picked these three because I think they're really important when it comes to the enablement part of this capability. So let's take a look at these. The first one up is to be focused on capabilities that drive the outcomes that you want for your business. Again, there's a bunch of capabilities that you can leverage to really help accelerate that DevOps culture and the acceleration of that value to your customers. And I think there's three really important fundamental ones that you should focus on, particularly when you're beginning or even in an intermediate part of that journey. So they are technical capabilities, measurement capabilities, and supported by the cultural capabilities. So I'm going to step through these and give some examples of some of the focus areas. So when you get technical capabilities, this is about reducing the friction between your engineering teams and the customer. When you think of measurement capabilities, it's the best practices and the capabilities of observing your systems both pre and post production and democratizing that data so you can continually improve. That really is the foundation then to your cultural capabilities, which support the growth of your overall mindset and capability maturity in your organization. So what type of things sit underneath these capabilities? And a lot of these will be familiar, but they're really important to be laser focused on when you think of driving that maturity and ultimately the culture of DevOps and instilling that mindset of that culture across your engineering teams. So when you think of continuous delivery and deployment, that is a key component of that friction between your developers and your engineers. So your customers. So a high degree of maturity is essential. The continuous testing and validation of that application as it goes out to your customers. When you think of the cognitive load that security app can bring to the table, reducing that for your developers. And two, I think of the most important when it comes to an agility side is around code maintainability. Having a strong maturity in this area is critical so you can quickly pivot to those requirements for your customers. Technical debt is also uber important, and not just the prevention of the debt itself, but how you manage the debt and prioritize it to remove those biggest constraints. Again, a key enabler when you think of agility from a software perspective. From a measurement capability, it's about the maturity and the growth of capabilities around those proactive notifications. So no manual interventions, the auto healing of your systems triggered by those notifications, tied closely into the maturity of observing your systems, not just in the systems themselves running production, but across that whole life cycle from your developer's machine all the way into production. Again, democratizing that, so you're creating a transparent and open culture that is supported by a continuous learning culture across your organization. Now, if you think of these capabilities as the what about the how? How do you actually go about maturing these capabilities and really driving that culture and mindset? And one way to look at it is thinking about it in 3 dimensions across the 3 hows: how you build things, how you operate things, and how you do things. And these are really closely aligned to engineering excellence, operational excellence, and agility excellence. So, for example, how do you do CI and CD in your organization? What are those best practices? When you think of the deployment patterns, the optimal patterns that you want to instill across your teams, what are they? When you think of feature toggles, etc., how do you implement them in your organization? Well, empowering your teams, so pushing the best practice to the edge into your teams and surfacing that up across your organization. Again, it's a commitment to excellence without being over opinionated in your organization. One key tenet to enabling this is ensuring that you codify that excellence. And that is reducing the cognitive load on your engineers. And this is really important when you're going through that journey of maturity. You're going to the cloud, you're developing that mindset and culture across your organization. So it makes it easy for your engineering teams to consume those practices, to learn about them while they focus on building those amazing experiences for your customers. Now, that all sounds awesome. What about challenges? I'll draw on 2 here. The first is when you think of the capabilities themselves, and particularly when you have a large organization that is moving at different speeds, what type of capabilities do you focus on? Do you focus on the capabilities that are going to help enable teams that are starting that journey? Or are you going to focus on capabilities that are going to help those teams already going to the cloud? You don't want to be over opinionated for teams that are already doing awesome work and accelerating, and you don't want to do too little for those teams beginning that journey. So getting that balance right, it can be a challenge. Another key thing is around the implementation, the how and the guidance, and instilling that culture of excellence. And, do you centralize that and, really have a centralized team that's going to drive that practices, or do you federate it across your organization, bringing that group together to really evolve how you do things, how you build things, and how you operate things in the cloud? So moving on to the second tier, this is paramount when you think of a continuous learning culture, a continuous improvement culture, which is a key tenet of any DevOps culture. And really, this is about instilling that innovation, experimental mindset across your teams. And one way to think about this is across a couple of principles. So first up, we all learn in different ways. And through this learning experience, you want to recognize that and be able to provide multiple channels of learning to your engineering team so they can really lever and pull the lever on those channels that really suits their style of learning. When you think of learning itself, you want to be focused on hands-on learning, learning more by doing as much as you can. And that's a great way for real-time feedback for your engineers, to get feedback from engineers who are proficient or mature in certain practices. Another key thing that I've seen huge success in is tying that learning to the goals, not just of the engineers and the personal development, but also to the team and the organization, and driving that sense of purpose for your organization and the learning itself. Again, a key tenet when you think of that cultural shift. But ultimately, you want this pillar to be an enabler to that mindset and the maturity of your organization. So really embedding it in your DNA is critical. Now, when it comes to learning, how do you approach and where do you focus on learning, particularly when you want to develop that mindset? So one way to look at it is to think of learning across 4 key areas. The first is as you develop core competencies in your engineers. So these are the core competencies which every engineer, regardless of where they work in your organization, must know. Then think of how do you instill learning and skills and knowledge in the competencies associated with the context in which those engineers work in. And then two, I think of really, really important, tied back to the goals and experimentation, is your personal development, ensuring that your engineers have that learning experience that is connected to their own growth and their own personal goals that they want to achieve. And finally, I think a really, really important one when you think of that DevOps mindset and the continuous improvement in knowledge is personal interest, enabling your engineers to seek out their interests outside their current context. And this is a couple of things, and instills that sense of community and enables your engineers to connect with people they may not otherwise do, but also to be able to bring that technology and learnings from that group into their context and be able to use it to innovate even further and quickly across their products and services. So again, awesome. What type of things, challenges, and I'll definitely draw on two here. The first is on the learning paths themselves. There's a couple of ways you can approach it. You can go really individualistic, where every engineer has their tailored path, but there's a couple of challenges there. Scale can be one. If you have thousands of developers in your organization, that can be really tough to roll out. So do you get the engineer to bring that to you, or do you get your managers and leaders to really drive that learning to the engineer? When it comes to this sense of content and be able to enable that multi-channel experience, that can also be a challenge. And again, particularly if you're working in a wide organization, how do you facilitate that content and have that momentum of learning as you spin up from starting in that journey to a more mature state? Now, the final pillar, if you're going to walk away with anything from this presentation, this is one of the key learnings I would love you to go away with. And this is around understanding your systems and understanding your organization at all aspects of it, and democratizing that data to drive continuous improvement. And particularly when you think of development teams and engineering teams, this is really, really important, because this area and the practices associated with modern development is very an opinionated space. What one person thinks is good practice, another person may disagree. And particularly, this is a challenge as you go through that maturity curve. So what can you do about it? Enabling data is critical to this. Now, one area I'd like to really zone in on is when you think of that end-to-end development life cycle, which we're all familiar with. So think of your SDLC process. So on the screen, the top blue bar, you can see an example. You code it, you test it, you build it, you get it into production. So how do you really optimize that? True data. So a couple of ways to approach it. One, we have the DORA metrics, which I consider at the macro level. So they're well defined, well understood from an industry perspective, tied to the outcome. So really help us drive some of the principles we talked about earlier. However, one of the biggest challenges there is when you think of that maturity curve, how do you know what practices and what areas to focus on for continuous improvement that is going to remove the largest constraint? And that's going to differ depending on your context, but also on your maturity. So how do you take the opinion out of that? One way to do that is enable data at this layer. So a really basic example, think about lead time. What are the type of things that go into reducing that lead time? Fundamentally, one of the things is around, say, build time itself, how long your tests take, where they execute, how they execute, how flaky they are, and the practices all aligned to that. So if you can enable the data at this level, that really empowers your team, again, pushing it to the edge, and then being able to use that data to really drive that improvement. And that really, really is a fundamental cornerstone when you think of enabling that mindset and your overall maturity in the DevOps space. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the pillars. I'm going to now pass it over to Jimmy, who's going to take that macro level of the organization and talk about it at the teams.
Thank you, Nick. So that was a great update. So Nick did a fantastic job at describing how an organization really enables DevOps at scale. When I'm going to take you on a journey to talk to you about how we take that and we embed it in the team, how we take and describe how the teams drive and how they operate in terms of principles, and also how the organization supports the teams in terms of services offers, so that we can support teams in achieving their best outcomes. So next slide, please. So as we think about teams, we think about, okay, well, what are the things you need to consider, to enable, really high performing teams? We need to focus upon the principles they execute against. We need to think about the developer experience the teams actually experience themselves, and how we as an organization offer these services so that developers, we're really focused on hiring great people in Fidelity, and we're really, really interested in making sure those people are as productive as quickly as possible once they enter the organization. And that's really about, enabling self-service across our development tooling, so folks can get access to our source code management system itself and actually release code as soon as possible. Another thing we're really key on is measuring, how we operate. So we are a culture that is very, very focused on continuous improvement. And how are you actually measuring where you're at and actually identifying opportunities to make improvements, so as you move forward, you're continuously improving. Another thing we're very, very focused is on value. We see our developers' time as exceptionally valuable, and we want to ensure that as developers execute work, that there's a large amount of work done to actually plan out and focus on and make sure that they're actually executing on value at all times, and really focusing on that above the line value, so that we're constantly looking to improve our products and services. So I think, when we think about teams, we think about autonomous teams that ownership is extremely key to, and we're thinking about making sure that we're adhering to the right principles, we're supporting the teams, making sure those teams have a great developer experience. The teams themselves are very focused on measuring and constantly focusing on improvement. And they're also, lastly but not least, focusing on making sure they're executing on the right work at the right time to realize value for us and our customers, and constantly driving improvements in our products and services. So next page, please. So when you think about principles, there's a number of principles you can see on the screen here that are really, really important to us. As we look at these principles, it's about, leveraging the best in class capabilities out there, whether that's open source, whether that's a buy versus build decision. Also, when we think about principles, these principles are adhered to the teams that execute the development, but also how we as an organization support the teams. So when we think about self-service, we're constantly looking to ensure that we can offer up self-service capabilities, and we build those as developers, but we also offer those self-service capabilities to our developers, so we really smooth and ease their path as they develop. Everything as code is key for us. We're a big driver towards that. We were establishing new platforms over the last number of years where we're making that really, really easy for our developers, because that really drives good practice and encourages a huge amount of reuse around the organization. We have approximately 12,000 developers in this organization, and the more reuse we can drive from that and create an environment where developers themselves can learn from each other is key to the success of our organization. Automation is another key thing. As we work on things, we're constantly looking to understand as a developer, and that's something that drives our team to focus on automation. We're also really, really focused, and this comes down from our leadership, is pace over perfection. It is better to get out there and execute and constantly try new features, etc., so that we're actually getting out ahead and we're making progress as fast as possible. When we think about, how we serve up our developers, we really think in the long term in terms of how we manage our platforms, and we think of those in terms of capabilities. And we're always, as our central teams that support our development teams, we're thinking about in terms of capabilities. We're thinking about, well, where are we in terms of capabilities we offer up for developers, and are we, best placed in making sure that they have the best available capabilities for them to do their job. And as we release platforms and capabilities, one of our key learnings in more recent years has been to enable best practice from the start as we actually release these capabilities. And that has a huge gearing effect for our development community, because as you release new platforms that support developers in terms of capabilities, you are releasing these platforms in terms of they are scalable, they are performant, but they have baked in best practice. So we're really bootstrapping our developers, and we're enabling them to focus on the value in terms of, producing business value from the get-go. So that, is really kind of shortens their journey to productivity and producing business value. And another key thing is, and Nick kind of touched on it there, we are a huge proponents of learning and mentoring. There's a huge investment in terms of allocating specific time across our teams to actually spend time learning. We see that as an investment in our future. We see that as, IT is a very, very temporal industry. It is constantly changing. The language are constantly evolving, and we need to give time to our developers, and we give time to ensure that they're, have that time and have that capability to constantly learn, constantly, give time for them to actually develop their skills. This organization, throughout its history has been a huge proponent of IT. It backs that in terms of investment, and it certainly backs that in giving our developers that time to actually train up and scale up to be the best developers they can be. Next slide, please. So again, talked about the team and what the team represents, and talked about the kind of components of, what's important for a team. But for us, we're really, really focused on hiring the best developers out there. So, one of our goals is, as soon as a developer gets in that door, we want those developers to be productive on the day they are hired. We want them, if there is a business need, we want them to have the ability to be able to actually produce code and release it to a production environment, because that's really, really important. We really value our developers, and we hire the best people. And how we do that is we deliver, and we're enabling, and our goals is to deliver a world-class developer experience. And that's about making sure, as we think about, a developer, think about the key capabilities that developer needs to actually do their job. We think about making sure, as we think about those capabilities, that we deliver them, in an enterprise strength fashion with baked in good practice. We're really, really focused on the user experience. We're really focused on, as we deliver those capabilities, that self-service is key. So as a developer gets their new laptop, and they sit in and they log in, they are one click away from clicking and setting up their entire development environment. So they can really focus on, producing business value, and, they're bootstrapped and enabled so that they can actually release that code to where they want to as soon as possible. And one last piece, Fidelity as an organization is very large. It's a large amount of developers. It's also quite diverse in terms of the business units and the way they operate. So as we bring in new platforms, we're really, really focused on making sure that we enable them. They are resilient. We're very security conscious in terms of how we set up our platforms, and we really try to make the right way the easy way for our developers. So again, for us, as I said, developers are first-class citizens in this organization. So we try and give them a first-class service, and we're, really focused. And our goals is to make sure those developers can produce code as soon as the business needs them. Next slide, please. So we talked about principles. We talked about developer experience. One other key thing we focus on is measuring, and really focus on as we develop, to really understand across our platforms, how frequently we are deploying, what is our cycle time, what is our quality like. And that's something that is extremely important in the conversation within the development team, to make sure that we're constantly benchmarking and looking at data and identifying opportunities to improvement. So we're constantly maturing ourselves and, increasing the team's performance as soon as we can and as quickly as we can. Next slide, please. So we talked about value. So, we're a financial services company, and we're very focused on value. We part of the culture we drive and we encourage in our development teams is to take a real good look at, the work you're doing, and to make sure that, that work is, we spend a large amount of time planning. We get into a continuous planning cycle where we're actually evaluating what is the next block of work we're looking to do and prioritizing that. And we're looking at making sure that as developers execute on the work, that they're really focused on stuff that actually, is progressing and moving that product and service. And that can take the form of new features for our end users and customers. It can also take the form of value through automation and, efficiency, so that, we're decreasing, if you like, our technical debt on our product, and we're actually producing capacity to develop new features and functions for our products and into our services. IT is an extremely dynamic temporal industry. The actual businesses that the IT faces off to are changing rapidly. So we have to be able to change rapidly, and we actually have to be able to generate capacity and capacity within our development teams by identifying automation opportunities, so we can actually reduce, and automate, key activities, and really then free up the team to focus on value in terms of, enabling and delivering business capabilities. So next slide, please. So as with anything, there's, numerous challenges and opportunities that we as an organization and development teams come across. And, so some key things are around culture, communication, technology. So, if we go to the next slide, I can kind of call out and talk to some of these things. One thing for us is culture. Culture is key, right? So, we as a team and as kind of drivers of development in the organization, really in culture, we really encourage a culture of high communication, a culture of high exchange of information. We're interested in working out loud. We're interested in, communicating directly to our colleagues, and really sharing our learnings, sharing our experience. We spend a lot of effort actually, placing really good visual cues around our principles. We're interested in making sure that, one of our key ones was, ownership is key for us. If you architect something, you own it. You own it from the design. You own it to the point that it is scalable and sustainable. There's no better place to learn about your code than in a production environment, and ownership is absolutely key for us. And we're really interested in driving a culture of high communication, high, sharing of information, using visual cues across our team, and making that team area their own area, so that they can actually, use it to kind of place their principles and share their information and share, the principles they're driven by across their team members. And really, again, it's really about communicating really effectively and frequently between team members. So if we move on to the next slide, then we can talk about more other things you need to consider in terms of, enabling a really strong, DevOps mindset in your teams. Communication is key. Communication, both from a kind of team perspective, it's really key, as you're providing those services to the actual teams themselves, that you've real clear communication between, the central services teams and our business partners. Culture, we talked about that is huge for us. It's about enabling a positive culture. It's about trying things fast and failing fast, right? And then from a technology perspective, there's been lots of learnings along the way, in terms of, it's very, very important as you evaluate your technology that it doesn't become a kind of drive towards tools. You need to stand back and actually evaluate technology from a capability perspective. And also, given Fidelity is such a large organization, scale and scalability and performance is key to us. And it's really key to make the right choices in terms of ensuring you're leveraging the market leader in the capability, whether it's vendor or whether you open source, and making sure that as we release those capabilities to our development teams, that there's been a large amount of work to make sure that that we make sure it's scalable, make sure it's performed, and also work with the development teams so that we can quickly get these capabilities out to them, and we can actually get those practices baked into them to actually drive acceleration in them, and so they can really focus on developing and delivering business value for our organization. So next slide, please. So that's kind of a summary from me. So thank you very, very much. Hopefully you got a good insight in terms of how we kind of drive organizations at a macro level. And then we look to enable that team, and we actually look to enable, real strong cultures, a strong culture of ownership and DevOps in the teams in our organization. Thank you.